Mila stood near the old gas station with a piece of cardboard held tight in both hands. She was 9 years old, small for her age, with a neat ponytail and cheeks made red by the cold wind. Her sweater was clean but thin, and her shoes looked like they had walked too many miles. Beside her sat a brown dog with a white patch on his chest and kind eyes that watched the road without fear. His name was Rocky, and he stayed so close that his shoulder touched her leg like he was guarding her from the whole world. The sign on the cardboard was written in big, uneven letters that looked like a child had worked hard to make them clear. It said "Dog for sale, $50. Cars passed by without stopping, and their tires made a soft hiss on the road. Some people glanced at the sign, then turned away fast, like they did not want to feel anything. A man in a blue jacket slowed down for a second, then shook his head and kept walking. A woman holding a coffee cup looked at Mila's face, then quickly looked away and pulled her scarf higher. Mila did not chase anyone or beg anyone, and she just stood there quietly and tried to look brave. Every time the wind pushed against her, she leaned forward a little and hugged the sign closer, like the cardboard could keep her steady. Rocky stayed calm and still, but his tail moved slowly when Mila touched his head, and that small movement looked like he was saying he trusted her no matter what. Mila remembered when Rocky first came into her life. He had been a skinny puppy hiding under a broken bench behind their building. She had found him after school and offered him half a sandwich, and he had eaten carefully from her hand. She had taken him home even though she knew her grandma might say no, and Rocky had followed her like he already belonged to her. Grandma had sighed and looked at the puppy's ribs, then she had brought out a bowl of water and a small plate of leftovers. From that day, Rocky had become more than a pet, and he had become the quiet promise that Mila was not alone. Now Mila tried not to remember those warm days too strongly, because they made her throat hurt. She tried to think only about what needed to be done today. $50 was not a big amount to grown people, but to Mila it felt like a mountain. She had counted the coins in the kitchen jar last night, and the jar had been almost empty. She had listened to her grandma cough in the next room, and she had heard her grandma whisper on the phone, asking the clinic if there was any way to get help sooner. Mila had not understood every word, but she understood the tired sound in her grandma's voice. She understood the way bills sat on the table like heavy stones. She understood the way grandma's hands shook when she tried to hold a cup of tea. A deep rumble rolled through the air, and it was louder than any car. A motorcycle turned into the station, black and shiny, with chrome that caught the pale light. The rider parked near the pumps and shut off the engine, and the sudden quiet made the world feel even colder. The man who got off the bike was tall and broad, with a leather jacket and heavy boots. His name was Tom, and his face looked tough in a way that made people assume he did not care about soft things. He removed his helmet and shook out his hair, then he noticed the sign and stopped moving. His eyes narrowed as he read it, and his jaw tightened like he was holding back words. Tom had been on the road most of his life. He had seen towns that looked cheerful from far away, and he had seen the struggle that lived behind their doors. He knew how quickly life could change, and he knew how people sometimes did painful things when they had no choices left. Still, seeing a child selling her dog felt like something that should not exist. He walked closer, slow and careful, like he did not want to scare the girl or the dog. Rocky lifted his head and watched him, but he did not bark, and he did not growl, and he only stayed close to Mila with steady patience. Tom stopped a few steps away and looked at Mila's hands. Her fingers were red from the cold, and the cardboard shook a little. He looked at Rocky next, and he saw a dog who looked healthy and well cared for, which made the sign even stranger. He took a slow breath and spoke in a voice that was low and calm. He asked if that was her dog. Mila nodded once. She did not smile, and she did not speak too fast. She said yes, and her voice sounded smaller than she wanted it to sound. Rocky leaned his head into her leg, and Mila's hand moved to his ear like it knew exactly where to touch. Tom asked why she was selling him. Mila looked down at Rocky and swallowed. She said she had to sell him, and she tried to keep her voice steady like a grown person. Tom shook his head slowly, not at her, but at the whole situation. He said dogs were family, and he said family should not be sold. Mila's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. She said Rocky was her best friend, and she said she knew it was wrong, but she said she had no choice. Tom felt something twist inside him. He had a sister when he was younger, and he remembered how she used to hold a stuffed toy and talk to it like it was alive. He remembered how she looked when she was scared, and how she tried to hide it. Mila had that same kind of bravery, the kind that was forced by life. Tom asked where her parents were. Mila shook her head and said it was just her and her grandma. Tom glanced around the station. There were a few people inside the store, and there was a clerk behind the counter, but nobody came out. The road stayed busy, and the world kept moving like it did not notice anything. Tom looked back at Mila and asked if her grandma knew she was doing this. Mila nodded slowly and said her grandma told her it was the only way. Tom crouched down so he was at Mila's height. He did not invade her space, and he kept his hands visible and relaxed. He asked what it was the only way for. Mila opened her mouth, then closed it, like the words did not want to come out. Her eyes moved away from Tom's face, and she stared at the dusty edge of the parking lot. Rocky made a small sound, soft and sad, and pressed closer to her. Tom waited, and he did not push. The wind moved again, and Mila's ponytail lifted. Mila took a breath that shook a little, then she whispered that her grandma was very sick. Tom's eyes softened, and his posture changed as if he suddenly carried a weight with her. Mila quickly rubbed her eyes with her sleeve and lifted the sign again, because a car had slowed down near the entrance. She did not want anyone to see her cry, and she did not want to look weak when she needed help. The car drove past without stopping. Mila stared at its taillights for a second, then looked forward again. Tom stood up, but he did not leave. He looked at Rocky, then at Mila, then at the sign again. He saw the careful way Mila's hand rested on Rocky's head, like she was trying to memorize him. He saw the way Rocky watched Mila's face more than he watched the road, like her feelings mattered more than anything else. Tom realized this was not a simple sale, and it was not about wanting money for fun. It was about fear and responsibility and a child trying to save the only adult she had. Tom spoke again, more gently now. He asked Mila what her grandma's name was. Mila answered that her grandma was named Nora. Tom repeated the name quietly, like he wanted to respect it. He asked where they lived, and Mila pointed down the road and said it was not far, just a few blocks past the small park. Tom nodded like he was making a decision inside his head. He told Mila to stay right there with Rocky for a moment, because he wanted to get something from inside the store. Mila's heart jumped with worry, because she was afraid he might call someone to take Rocky away, or she was afraid he might tell her she was doing something wrong. Still, she nodded because she did not know what else to do. Tom walked into the store, and Mila watched through the glass as he spoke to the clerk. Rocky stayed pressed against her, and his calm presence kept her from shaking too much. Mila held her sign tighter and waited, hoping that whatever happened next would not break what little she still had. Tom came out of the store holding a small paper bag and a bottle of water. He walked back toward Mila with slow steps, careful not to scare her. Mila watched his face closely, trying to guess what he was thinking. Rocky stayed calm and alert, his body still pressed against Mila like a quiet promise. Tom stopped in front of them and handed the bottle to Mila, telling her she should drink because the wind was cold. Mila hesitated for a second, then took the bottle and whispered thank you. She took a small sip and felt a little warmer inside, even though the air around her was still sharp. Tom looked at the sign again and then looked at Rocky. He asked if Rocky had always been gentle like this. Mila nodded and said Rocky never hurt anyone and always stayed close to her and her grandma. She said Rocky slept near the door every night and barked softly if someone walked too close to the house. Tom listened carefully, and each word painted a clearer picture in his mind. He could see that Rocky was not just a dog, but a quiet protector and a source of comfort in a small fragile world. Tom asked how long her grandma had been sick. Mila answered that it had been many months and that some days were better and some days were very hard. She said her grandma tried to smile even when she was tired, and she still made soup when she could stand. Mila said she helped clean the house and warm the blankets and remind her grandma to rest. As she spoke, her voice stayed steady, but her hands shook slightly. Tom noticed every detail and felt a deep ache grow in his chest. He asked Mila why they needed the money right now. Mila lowered her head and said the clinic wanted payment for medicine and tests. She said her grandma tried to hide the bills, but Mila had seen them on the table. She said she heard her grandma crying quietly one night, and that was when she decided she had to do something. She said $50 was not enough, but it was all she could think of. Tom took a long breath and looked away for a moment, because his eyes burned. Tom remembered a time long ago when he had been young and helpless too. He remembered sitting in a cold room with his brother, counting coins and hoping they would be enough. He remembered how unfair the world had felt, and how angry he had been that good people had to suffer. Those memories came back strong as he looked at Mila and Rocky standing together against the wide, careless road. Tom reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. Mila noticed the movement and quickly shook her head. She said she did not want charity and that she only wanted to sell Rocky. Her voice was firm, even though her eyes were scared. She said Rocky needed a good home, and she wanted someone kind to take him. Tom felt his throat tighten at her words. He told her gently that sometimes help did not mean weakness. Mila listened, but did not answer. Tom asked if he could meet her grandma before making any decision. Mila looked surprised and confused. She asked why he would want that. Tom said he wanted to understand everything and make sure he did the right thing. He said he did not want to take Rocky away without knowing the full story. Mila looked down at Rocky and then back at Tom. After a moment, she nodded slowly. Tom told Mila to pack up her sign and that he would walk with her. Mila folded the cardboard carefully like it was something important. Rocky stood up and stretched, then stayed close as they started walking down the road. Tom walked on Mila's other side, making sure cars gave them space. People passed them without paying attention, unaware of the quiet moment unfolding. As they walked, Mila talked more freely. She told Tom about school and how Rocky waited for her every afternoon. She said Rocky seemed to know when she was sad and would rest his head on her lap. She said her grandma said Rocky was smarter than most people. Tom smiled softly at that and said he believed it. Rocky's tail moved gently, like he understood he was being praised. They reached a small old building with chipped paint and narrow steps. Mila pointed to it and said this was home. Tom followed her inside, and the air smelled of tea and clean cloth. The place was simple and neat, with a small couch and a table near the window. A thin blanket rested on the couch, and an older woman lay there with tired eyes but a gentle face. Her name was Nora. Nora looked up when she heard the door and smiled weakly when she saw Mila. She asked who the man was. Mila introduced Tom quietly and said he wanted to talk. Nora struggled to sit up, but Tom quickly moved forward and told her to stay comfortable. He sat in a chair nearby and spoke respectfully. He said he had met Mila at the gas station and wanted to understand her situation better. Nora closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. She said Mila was a good child and too brave for her age. She said she never wanted Mila to sell the dog, but she had no other ideas. She said Rocky had been a blessing, but she could not watch Mila suffer anymore. Tom listened without interrupting, his hands resting on his knees. Rocky walked over to Nora and placed his head gently near her hand. Nora smiled and touched his fur slowly. She said Rocky kept her company when Mila was at school and made her feel safe. Tom saw the bond clearly now, and it felt heavy and real. He realized that taking Rocky away would leave a hole much deeper than anyone could easily fill. Tom stood up after a moment and walked toward the window. He looked outside at the quiet street and made a decision that felt final. He turned back and told Nora and Mila that he could not buy Rocky. Mila's heart dropped, and her fingers tightened around Rocky's collar. Before she could speak, Tom continued. He said he could not buy Rocky because Rocky already belonged exactly where he was. He said selling him would not solve the real problem and would only cause more pain. Mila felt tears rise, but she stayed silent. Tom reached into his jacket again and pulled out his wallet. This time, he placed a stack of bills gently on the table. Nora's eyes widened, and Mila shook her head again. Tom said this was not payment and not a loan. He said it was help given because it was needed. He said he had lost people before and wished someone had helped him sooner. He said Rocky would stay with Mila and Nora, because love should not be traded away. Mila felt her chest tighten, and tears finally fell, but she did not look away. Nora tried to speak, but her voice broke. She reached for Tom's hand and thanked him quietly. Tom nodded and said he would also drive them to the clinic and help with the paperwork. He said he knew how these places worked and did not want them to feel alone. Mila hugged Rocky tightly, and Rocky leaned into her, calm and steady as always. As Tom walked back toward the door, he felt something shift inside him. He felt lighter and heavier at the same time. He knew this moment would stay with him forever. Mila watched him with new hope in her eyes, not because of the money, but because someone had seen her struggle and chosen to stand with her. Tom drove them to the clinic in the late afternoon, and the sky looked pale like it was holding its breath. Mila sat in the back seat with Rocky, and she kept one hand on his fur as if that touch could keep everything steady. Nora sat in the front seat with a folded blanket over her knees, and she tried to look calm even though her breathing was shallow. Tom drove carefully and did not speak too much, because he knew the quiet gave them space to feel safe. Mila looked out the window at the passing streets and wondered if life could really change in one day. Rocky watched Tom through the gap between the seats, and his eyes stayed gentle but alert. Tom noticed that look in the mirror, and he respected the dog for caring so deeply. When they reached the clinic, Tom parked close to the entrance and helped Nora step out slowly. Mila held Nora's elbow with both hands, and Rocky walked close on the other side, moving at Nora's pace. Inside, the air smelled clean and sharp, and the waiting room was full of tired faces and quiet voices. Tom went to the counter and spoke to the receptionist with a steady tone. He asked what papers were needed and what steps came next, and he listened like every detail mattered. Mila stood beside Nora and held her hand, and she could feel how cold Nora's fingers were. Rocky sat near Mila's feet and stayed still, as if he understood this place was important. Soon, a nurse called Nora's name, and Mila's heart started beating faster. Tom asked if Mila could go with Nora, and the nurse nodded after looking at Nora's tired eyes. Mila walked beside the nurse and tried to be brave, but her stomach felt tight. Tom stayed in the waiting area for a moment to handle forms and payments, and he kept his word without making a big show of it. He filled out the papers with careful handwriting, and he asked questions to make sure nothing was missed. A man nearby watched him, and then looked away, as if he did not know what to do with kindness that appeared out of nowhere. In the small exam room, Nora sat on the bed while the nurse checked her pulse and asked gentle questions. Mila stood close and answered when Nora's voice grew weak. Mila explained how Nora had been feeling for months, and how the bad days had become more common. Nora tried to smile at Mila, but the smile looked tired, like a candle trying to stay lit. The nurse listened and nodded, and then she left to bring the doctor. Rocky lay down near the door, and his ears moved whenever someone passed in the hallway. When the doctor arrived, she spoke calmly and explained what tests would happen today. Mila listened hard and tried to understand each word, because she felt like understanding was a kind of control. Nora reached for Mila's hand and squeezed it softly, and Mila squeezed back like a promise. The doctor asked about Nora's daily life, and Nora admitted she often hid pain so Mila would not worry. Mila's eyes filled, but she blinked and stayed steady, because she did not want Nora to feel guilty. The doctor assured them that many people did this, and that asking for help was not a failure. After the tests, Nora looked exhausted, and Mila could see her shoulders droop with relief and fear at the same time. The doctor returned with results that needed more care, but she also spoke about treatment options that could help. Mila felt hope appear like a small light inside her, even though she was still scared. Tom came into the room at that moment, holding a cup of warm tea for Nora and a small snack for Mila. He handed them over quietly and asked if the doctor had explained everything clearly. The doctor nodded and thanked Tom for helping, and Tom only replied that families should not have to carry heavy things alone. On the way home, the streetlights began to glow, and the car felt warmer than it had earlier. Nora rested her head against the seat and closed her eyes, and her breathing sounded a little easier. Mila held the clinic papers in her lap and read the words again and again, trying to make the future less unknown. Tom drove with both hands on the wheel, and he looked like a man who had finally found a purpose that made sense. Rocky sat upright, watching the road like a guard, but he leaned into Mila whenever the car slowed. Mila finally spoke in a small voice and asked why Tom helped them. Tom did not answer right away, because he wanted to choose words that were true. Tom said that when he was younger, he needed help and did not get it soon enough. Tom said he watched people he loved struggle in silence, and he promised himself he would not walk past that kind of pain again. Mila listened and felt a strange feeling, like gratitude mixed with worry, because she did not want this kindness to disappear. Tom said he was not trying to be a hero, and he was only doing what he wished someone had done for him. Nora opened her eyes and told Tom that Mila had almost given up her best friend today. Tom looked back for a second and saw Mila's hand on Rocky, and he shook his head slowly as if the thought still hurt. Tom said that love should not be sold, and he said Mila was brave for trying, but she should never have been put in that position. When they arrived home, Tom carried Nora's blanket and helped her to the couch. Mila made warm water and brought it carefully, copying the way Nora used to do it for her. Nora sipped slowly and looked at Mila with a soft smile that held both pride and sadness. Mila sat on the floor beside Nora's feet, and Rocky curled against her hip like he belonged there forever. Tom looked around the small room and noticed how neat it was, and how hard they had worked to keep dignity even with so little. He asked if there was food in the kitchen, and Mila admitted that supplies were low. Tom went out again and returned with grocery bags, placing them on the table like he was building a wall against fear. Mila wanted to protest, but the words would not come out, because her throat felt full. Nora tried to refuse too, but her voice was weak, and Tom gently insisted. Tom said he would also check in tomorrow and help them set up the next clinic visit. Mila nodded slowly, because she did not know how to say thank you in a way that felt big enough. Tom noticed a small photo on the wall of Mila holding Rocky as a puppy, and he stared at it for a long moment. Tom said Rocky looked like he had always been the same kind of loyal. Mila smiled through tears and said Rocky never left her side, not even when she felt like the world forgot her. That night, Mila lay in bed with Rocky sleeping near the door as usual. She stared at the ceiling and replayed the day in her mind, from the gas station wind to the clinic lights. She realized that she had been carrying fear like a heavy bag, and someone finally helped her set it down. She also realized that Tom looked tough on the outside, but he carried old pain like hidden bruises. Mila decided that when she grew up, she wanted to be the kind of person who noticed quiet struggles. Outside, the street was calm, and the cold wind softened into a steady hush. Inside, Nora slept with a little more peace than before, and Rocky breathed slow and even. Tom rode his motorcycle back to his place, but he did not feel alone on the road anymore. He felt tied to a small home and a brave child and a loyal dog, and that connection made his chest ache in a good way. The morning arrived quietly, and soft light entered the small room through the thin curtains. Mila woke up before her alarm and sat up slowly, listening to the calm sounds of the house. Nora was still asleep on the couch, breathing evenly, and Rocky lay near the door like always. Mila felt a gentle warmth in her chest, because for the first time in many weeks, fear did not rush at her the moment she opened her eyes. She got out of bed carefully and walked to Nora, checking her face for signs of pain. Nora opened her eyes and smiled faintly, and that small smile felt like a gift. Mila whispered good morning, and Nora squeezed her hand to show she was okay. Mila made simple breakfast with toast and warm tea, moving quietly so she would not tire Nora. Rocky followed her into the kitchen and sat nearby, watching every movement with calm attention. As Mila placed the tray near Nora, she remembered how she had stood at the gas station holding a sign that felt heavier than herself. That memory already felt distant, like something that belonged to another life. Nora ate slowly and told Mila she felt a little stronger today. Mila nodded and tried not to let hope turn into fear, because she knew healing took time. Rocky rested his head on Nora's knee, and Nora gently stroked his fur, thanking him for being such a good friend. Later that morning, there was a knock at the door. Mila's heart jumped for a moment, but then she recognized the steady sound and felt calm again. Tom stood outside with a warm smile and 2 paper bags. He greeted them softly and asked how Nora was feeling. Nora told him she was tired but hopeful, and Tom nodded like that was enough for now. He placed the bags on the table and explained what was inside, including medicine instructions written clearly so Mila could read them easily. Mila listened closely, because she wanted to understand everything. Tom spoke slowly and carefully, never making them feel rushed or small. Over the next days, Tom became a steady presence in their lives. He drove Nora to appointments and sat nearby, reading quietly while Mila held Nora's hand. He helped talk to people at the clinic and made sure questions were answered fully. Mila watched him and learned that strength did not always come from being loud. Sometimes strength came from showing up again and again. Rocky seemed to understand this too, because he greeted Tom every time with a gentle wag and calm trust. Tom noticed and smiled, saying that a dog like Rocky knew good people when he saw them. As weeks passed, Nora slowly gained more energy. Some days were still hard, and Mila stayed close, ready to help. On better days, Nora sat by the window and watched the world outside, telling Mila stories from when she was young. Mila listened carefully, holding those stories like treasures. Tom visited often, but he never acted like he owned the help he gave. He treated it like something natural, something that simply needed to be done. Mila noticed how his eyes softened when he watched Nora rest and when he saw Rocky guard the door. She understood that Tom carried his own quiet history, even if he did not speak about it much. One afternoon, Mila returned from school to find Tom fixing a loose step outside the building. She dropped her bag and rushed over, asking what he was doing. Tom laughed softly and said he noticed the step was unsafe. Mila felt a lump in her throat, because she realized how deeply he cared. Rocky sat nearby, supervising seriously, and Mila smiled at him. That evening, the three of them shared a simple meal, and the room felt fuller than it ever had before. Nora watched them with a peaceful expression, grateful beyond words. One day, the doctor shared better news. Nora's treatment was helping, and while the road ahead was still long, there was real progress. Mila listened with wide eyes, holding Rocky close. When the doctor left, Mila hugged Nora tightly and finally allowed herself to cry. Nora held her and whispered that Mila had been stronger than she ever should have had to be. Tom stood nearby, feeling his own eyes burn, and he turned away for a moment to steady himself. That moment stayed with him, because it reminded him why stopping at the gas station had mattered so much. Time continued to move forward, and the seasons slowly changed. Mila no longer worried about food or clinic visits the way she once had. She focused more on school and friends, and she laughed more often. Rocky stayed the same loyal presence, greeting each day with quiet joy. Tom still rode his motorcycle, but his rides felt different now. The road did not feel empty anymore, because he knew where his heart belonged. He had found family in an unexpected place, and that connection filled something he thought was gone forever. One afternoon, Mila asked Tom why he had broken down that day at the gas station. Tom thought for a moment and then answered honestly. He said he saw a child ready to give up her heart to save someone she loved. He said that kind of love deserved protection, not loss. Mila nodded and hugged Rocky, understanding more than she said. Nora watched them from the doorway and felt peace settle in her chest. Years later, Mila would remember those days clearly. She would remember the cold wind and the cardboard sign. She would remember the fear and the courage and the kindness that changed everything. She would remember how a loyal dog never left her side and how a stranger became family. For now, she simply lived in the moment, grateful for warm mornings and quiet evenings. Rocky slept peacefully near the door, still guarding the home he had almost lost. Nora rested with hope in her heart, and Tom sat nearby, content in a way he had never known before. The world had not become perfect, but it had become kinder, and for them, that was more than enough.